It's definitely been a journey. I feel like my entire recovery journey has been learning how to trust myself, trusting myself in taking up space, trusting myself in choosing the right path for me, even if it doesn't look like what I perceive other people want it to look like. Trusting the people around me to still be there, regardless of what decision I make, and knowing that I can keep myself safe.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Yo, as always, we're super excited to get into this episode, and we want to let you know on the front end of the show that there are some mentions of gun violence in this episode, specifically school shootings. There's nothing super graphic, but we want to give you a heads up just in case this is something that's triggering to you or something that you just can't sit through. And if that's the case, we ask that you do what's right for you and come back to the next episode. We'll be here when you get back. For those that can hang, this is a very impactful episode, and I can't wait for you to hear more from Michelle. Welcome, everybody, to another beautiful episode of the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. We are your hosts, Bryce III, he, him pronouns.
And Liz McKean, she, her pronouns.
I think that's the first time I ever used beautiful as a verb for the show, Liz.
It made me feel really happy. I love that.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
The feeling of smiling inside is always a wonderful way to start the show.
Yeah.
How's your energy?
Let's see. How is my energy? I have that weird, so I know I've talked about this in other episodes, but I have anxiety just as a human, and I am tired but still anxious. So it's like this weird, I wish I could go to sleep and also feel like everything's a little buzzy and it's uncomfortable. And that's how I feel today. But I'm getting through, and it helps to be in a room with people who are incredibly supportive and beautiful. How about you?
Beautiful. Beautiful is the theme. No, thank you for the transparency. I think I don't know. I got to thinking. I was at this this podcast mixer yesterday, and it was around all these other different podcasts, and just to hear people talk about their show, and like not to compare, but like this show is so very like heartfelt.
Yeah.
Like it's full of heart, and it's full of like people who are willing to just show up and get naked. I mean, you know, I couldn't think of any other metaphor in that moment, but like just really be themselves, and it's a beautiful space. And I think like that alone allows for us to create community, but also like extends community to the listeners all over the world. So thank you for your transparency. Bryce's energy is pretty straight today. I don't know if this episode will air before the episode that we talked about my ADHD flare up. But since then, if this comes out after that, I've just been showing up and using the tools that I know as well as new tools that I'm learning to be able to show up for my process. And today was a day where I had to hit the reset button maybe like 7 times already, and it's just less lack of compassion than other days. So I'm grateful for my self-compassion meter today. And with all that being said, that's enough of us. Who do we have here with us today, Liz?
There'll definitely be more of us, I think. So today we have the wonderful Michelle Costigan, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor, clinical alcohol and drug counselor, supervisor, art therapist, and yoga instructor. After my own heart. She believes that movement and nature have saved her life countless times and enjoys being able to share these tools with others through her role as the Phoenix's program manager in Las Vegas. And we're just so excited to have her here and to just talk about her story and to bring her beautiful self exactly as you are today. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm okay. I appreciate both of your authenticity and sharing where you're at. That puts me at ease as well.
Good. I feel like that is, I mean, I don't think we could do this otherwise, like because we want to show up in exactly that way. And it's such a honor to, I don't know, to hear folks come and share their stories. So to show up in any other way would be,
It'd be whack.
Would be
Just say
whack.
it. Just be blunt with it. It'd be super whack. And I think not to dig on the world, because like I'm super not optimistic, but I just tend to like wear the lens of like the world being a supportive and caring place. And there are a lot of spaces that are inauthentic. And, I could, be one of the ones who stand on the podium and like, these inauthentic places need to minimize. Or, I could just do my best to create an authentic space everywhere I go, just so that I'm a contribution to what it is that I desire to see in the world. And there's so many other people that desire that. they come through this show, and then we have conversations. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Michelle, and excited to dig into your story.
So let's dig right on in. So, Michelle, I know that recovery means something slightly different in your personal life than it does necessarily to not everyone that's come onto this show. I feel like we've had a lot of diversity within what recovery means to folks. So let's just start with that. What does recovery mean to you personally?
That's a heavy question to start with.
Start with a big one.
Right. I think for me, I really align with the SAMSHA definition of recovery, which they describe as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Personally, I identify as a person in recovery from trauma. Mm-hmm. And I would say that recovery journey has been going on for about 15 plus years now. And I feel like I actively have to keep that at the forefront in my mind in order to continue choosing to engage with other people, with myself, and with activities in my life to keep myself healthy in all aspects, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all of the aspects. It needs to be kind of top priority.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way of describing it. And I feel like I just think I share very much that exact sentiment of just that constant betterment and keeping it top of mind. You're a big helper. Like, I'm just reading even your bio. We haven't worked together super closely within the Phoenix, but just, I think even if we had, I might not know all those things about you. The fact that you are a clinical counselor and that you are a counselor in, I think it was in alcohol and drug counseling specifically, yoga instructor. Is that part of your own recovery, or is that a separate piece of who you are?
Asking specifically about the yoga?
Just all the things, the way that you show up for other people, the way that you are just a helper. Like, I don't even know if that's the right word. That's just what's coming up for me right now.
Yes, I think I have an interesting relationship with being a helper because I grew up in an environment where in order to stay safe, I had to kind of look at the adults or the other people around me and know how to show up in a way to keep myself safe. So people pleasing was there from very, very young, and also taking care of other people and feeling this like overwhelming sense of responsibility to show up in a way to make sure other people were happy in order to keep myself safe. And I think that kind of bled into my career. And there came a point in my career where I was like, this is recreating patterns that were unhealthy for me in the past. And I need to really examine that and take a step back and figure out a way to find balance in all of these areas. So I am not continuing to repeat situations from my past that were unhealthy for me and for the people around me. So it's an interesting balance where, yes, I do identify like being a helper as a piece of my recovery journey, of my own personal healing, but also finding the balance there between helping other people and also taking up space in my own world and with the people in my life.
Yeah, I feel like that is, well, it's beautiful is what it is. I was trying to think of another word because we've used it a lot, but it really is, because I think the forever thing that needs to be top of mind when you are in a helping profession, to have that balance, to not lose yourself in the helping. And especially when you come from that space of people pleasing, of having to take care of everybody else, like how do you go into that as a career and not lose yourself in it, and still have, your own self-care practices and have your recovery be a thing that is as, if not more important, because you really can't help anybody if that's not the case. So how do you do it?
That's a great question, and one that I'm still exploring. What does that balance look like? So prior to working with the Phoenix, I was working in a clinical setting, and our mental health system is not built in a way to support clinicians. I have worked in a variety of different types of settings, in hospice and palliative care, in community mental health, in inpatient psych, residential treatment, all levels of care, of addiction treatment, drug court. And every environment that I worked in felt very much like, not necessarily, I'm trying to figure out a way to say this, that we're like the insurance companies, or whomever is paying for services is dictating the services rather than the human being that's sitting in front of you. And I feel like it's become this very like mechanical process where everybody is a machine. We need to get X amount of billable hours, see X amount of people per week, and it just isn't sustainable. And so I got to a point where I was so burnt out that I made a huge career shift. I had a private practice. I ended up closing my private practice and became a kayaking tour guide, which was like the scariest decision that I had to make ever in my life, but also one that saved my life. Making that transition and like stepping out of what's expected based on my education, what I poured time and energy and a lot of money into doing, and taking a risk like that and realizing I don't know what's going to happen here was scary. But finding the opportunity to take a step back and prioritize me in the workplace as well was really, really life-changing for me. And now being in a position where I get to kind of marry the best of both of these worlds, the best of the clinical therapy counseling world, as well as the outdoor recreation guiding industry, feels like the perfect marriage that's sustainable for me to show up in a way to still be that helper, where it's also not taking away from my own self-care practices, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. I think that's a perfect way to put it too, is when you're giving, obviously you're giving, right? There's something that is going to be taken, that someone is going to take who is receiving it. And that's a really, powerful and incredible gift to be giving. But like when it starts to take more than it gives back, and take more than you even have to give, it's hard to recognize that not only in like the system that works that way, but also in just like a culture that encourages that. We're always like, oh, it's such a, like, it's almost like martyrdom is celebrated, and that is it doesn't help anybody. Like, because even as as a person who is out there providing that counseling and therapy, like, I'm sure you weren't telling people like give so much until you completely have nothing left. Like, no, but you've got to walk the walk in order to be helping folks. Like, I've definitely known that of myself when I've talked to people, whether that was in like a healthcare setting or teaching yoga, or just like talking to a friend, like, take a day off, or even in a supervisory way, take a day. Like, you gotta take care of yourself. And then at the same time, I'm working all weekend, and I'm, like completely wringing myself right out. And it's like, God, no, people watch your actions. And yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for saying that too, because I think a lot of folks that listen to this podcast are, even if it's not an official title, in a place where people, come to them and ask for support, and to be able to have that, I don't even know, like a permission slip, even if it comes from a podcast, to take care of you. I think that's really powerful. So
why kayaking though?
Back to the important part of the conversation.
That's a great question. I feel like spending time in nature and moving my body are two things that have saved my life countless times. And kayaking feels really meditative because you're doing this like repetitive body motion and you're surrounded by majestic nature. Also, my phone was on airplane mode for like 14 to 17-hour days, which is
Mm.
amazing. 7 hours paddling on the
amazing.
river. It's just, yeah, it honestly, there was a job posting on Indeed and I was like, I know how to kayak. I can do that. Let's see what happens.
Mm.
And the universe said yes, which was great.
It seems to me like the record skip. So you know how like there is, this record and it's playing and you're in the groove and then the record skips and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, who am I? Like, what is my identity? What is going on? It really seems to me like one of those experiences where it's like things were going the way that they were going. Your training, your background is in this, and you've been in so many different levels of care, and you've like orbited this sphere, and then like the record skip. And for me, in my personal experience, like that record skip has nourished my spirit in ways that I can't. Maybe I will be able to put in words one day. But right now, like there's not necessarily more that I can do than to put this magnifying glass on it. And that was like the catalyst to that magnifying glass is your story about like I was doing this and then I went to be a kayak tour guide.
Right.
So like in that, what were some of the revelations you had after doing all that intense work, working with other people within like addiction and within like the therapeutic realm to go to like this more meditative realm for yourself, but also like showing people a good time and showing people how to have that experience that you knew how to have.
Mm-hmm. It kind of goes back to that permission slip that Liz was talking about, giving myself permission to show up authentically as I am in that moment. The first permission slip had to come when I made the decision to close my private practice. And that decision was not made lightly. And it was born out of a recognition that I was no longer in a place where I could provide services to clients. And I think when I made the transition into being a kayak guide, initially I was not well received on the river. People were like, guests received me well. The other guides were like, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're here.
Interesting.
Like, you're a therapist. Why are you here? What are you doing? And they would be asking me all of these questions. And growing up in an environment where it didn't feel safe for me to take up space, and then moving into a profession where my job was literally to create a container for someone else to take up all that space and to not like to have this, I don't want to say like wall up, but to be kind of like a projection screen for whoever was sitting across from me in the office and get curious about the questions that these people were asking me in a therapeutic sense. If they were curious about how old I was, or if I was in a relationship, or if I was in recovery, or if I'd ever used whatever substance, and having to kind of deflect answers to those questions because that space was not about me. It was about the person who was sitting across from me. To be asked those questions in a space where I could answer genuinely and authentically was terrifying at first, if I'm being completely honest.
Sure.
And there was definitely a learning curve to just like, what is it in this environment and in all relationships in general, where I'm allowing myself to now show up authentically and just answer questions without questioning why someone is asking me that thing. What is their incentive or reasoning for wanting to know that? How do I build a deeper relationship without necessarily answering that question directly? And being able to just be.
Is that this is kind of a selfish question, but I find myself in, even personal relationships, and I'm not someone who has been a therapist, but I've been in helping professions for a lot of my life. And also I think this is just, the people pleaser, making sure everybody else is okay, part of me too. is there's something inside of me that almost keeps score, where it's just like, okay, you've shared these things, so now it's okay for me to share these things, like in a relationship where that's appropriate, or, I've shared too much, so now I need to really shut up because I really need you to get back up here because otherwise I'm uncomfortable, and it's like it's some kind of funny balance that happens in my mind. I'm just wondering if that is something you've ever experienced. It's okay to say absolutely not.
I understand what you're saying, and I have experienced that, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as keeping score. I think that's how, as humans, we seek safety in relationships. When someone is willing to show up in a vulnerable way, that gives us permission to do the same. And it's a natural response when someone is not giving the same amount as you of information, of compassion, of energy, attention, whatever, in any relationship, for your flags to raise and be like, oh, maybe this isn't as safe as I thought it was, and take that step.
Yeah. Interesting. Huh. Have you found that that's, in the way that it's felt to you, like that shift happened when you went into the kayaking? Like, are you more comfortable now, like taking up that space?
Yes, but it's definitely been a journey. It's been 5 years since I shifted into a my primary job is non-clinical. And I feel like it's a very intentional practice for me to take up space. Like even coming onto this podcast, I had quite a bit of anxiety about how do I show up right? Am I allowed to say XYZ? How do I take up space in this capacity? Again, kind of echoing personal life and professional life, telling me the space, like you are the space holder for other people instead of being able to fill that space yourself.
What's so interesting? And I don't know if there's a question here, but it is definitely been my experience where being a coach, certified peer recovery mentor, and running groups and holding spaces for others, I think the biggest contribution to those spaces was like my ability to just be honest and just be me. And, like you said, Michelle, once I see that you're sharing, like now I want to share. It's like, yo, this guy look like this, come from here, and he talking like this, and he said that. Like, like I've been asked on multiple occasions, like, how are you so fearless? And it's like, yo, I used to live a life where I would have different masks for different rooms. And sometimes I go in the room with the wrong mask on and be like, who are you? I'm like, hold on, wait, let me put my other mask on, And so for me in my personal recovery, it's just important for me to be authentic and just be me everywhere I go. And in that, people see that, people feel that, and it's like, oh, there's a genuine nature here. I wanna share it too. And in some of the best spaces, some of the most safe feeling spaces, some of the spaces where people may disclose things that they might not disclose in other places are due to the perpetuation of that energy, of that genuine, authentic energy. And it's kind of like that thing where it's like the more we converse with ourselves, the more we understand our own spirit, our own emotions, our own placement, on this rock we call home, like the more we can contribute to others, because there's this unspoken language of clarity about who it is that I am. Even like sometimes people wear things, and I'm like, I like this person. I haven't talked to this person yet, but they got this jacket, and this jacket is cool as hell, and like I just want to like be in this person's company because this jacket is dope, and it makes me want to be more of myself. There's so many different ways to communicate and create that community. So no question there, but I think the fact that you came to a space after you left a space, and you were open about who you were, where you came from, and just being there. I think just you being you, even coming on this show, like just you being you is gonna make the best episode that we could ever make, and whatever you're called to share, whatever it sounds like, wherever you are in your life right now, like that's it, So yeah, no question. I guess just open dialogue.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate that reflection. And I feel like that's the most important part of the therapeutic relationship is the relationship itself. It's not the tools that you're gaining in those therapy sessions. It's being able to authentically take up space with another human being and allowing yourself to be witnessed wholly and completely without judgment. That's the healing element. And I feel like because I have gone through some painful experiences, I have the capacity to show up and like sit in someone else's pain without needing to try to change it or to control it or to fix it in any way. And I think that that's a really healing experience for other people. I know that that was a healing experience for me. You mentioned the community element. The community healing is one of the things that was most powerful for me. Growing up, I like to describe my childhood as like growing up in this culture of secret keeping, where like the things that were happening at home were never talked about and no one saw them. And it was like, I could not, like nobody knew those pieces of my life. And then when I went to college, my freshman year of college, there was a school shooting. And this was 15 years ago, February 14th, 2008. And the fact that this was such a public experience, like there was no opportunity to keep that kind of trauma hidden. That was my permission slip to then talk about all of the other things that I was also carrying in my own healing journey from being in that mass violence. And the university community coming together, this sense of community healing, where this wasn't a secret from anybody and everybody was in pain and experiencing this recovery together. We were on a healing journey together, was again that permission slip to show up authentically in whatever pain you were experiencing in that moment, to then be able to move forward together as a community. And I think that's one of the pieces that I love so much about the Phoenix too, is that we're creating a community of healing and giving folks the opportunity to heal together instead of continuing to heal on our little islands where people may or may not know what lived experiences we've had.
Yeah. And so much of the messages that we get, and also the ones that I think inherently live within us, like just, there's just so much shame around having the experiences that so many of us have had, that we have just this need to just not tell, like, it's got to be only me. How shameful that this is, these things that I've done. Like, I don't even recognize that person that's done those things. So you hold it really tightly. And then the power of hearing someone else say something that it's like, holy crap, that is a thing that I've done too, that I never would have said out loud. And you did. So now I can. And it's the floodgates just open. And yeah, that's when the healing starts.
Yeah, I had that experience very early. Like I had that experience in rehab. To be completely honest, I went to a group and a dude, and I thought that I was terminally unique. And he just had shared something that was like, yo, you too? I thought it was something I was going to take to my grave, or that if I said it, I'd be weird or I'd be an outcast. And when he shared it, I don't think we talked after that. Like, I was trying to get his number and yeah, listen. But I don't even think we talked after that. But it just, like you said, Michelle, it opened the floodgates. And I think that context, though, context plays a huge role too in what it is that we now feel safe to be able to share. Because like you said, it opened the floodgates and all the other stuff fell through. But for me, it hasn't been a black and white thing. Like there's been times where somebody, 10 years into my personal recovery, somebody will share something and it's like, oh, I haven't talked about that yet because I haven't had the context in which to share that. And so your experience had to be pretty traumatizing. And like that context is a context that not a lot of people, well, I can't say not a lot of people, but it's rare that I've had a conversation with somebody who's had that experience. And so with that specific context, how do you feel that impacted you and your willingness to share all of the other stuff that you experienced thus far? Like, yeah.
hmm You know, I feel like gun violence has been a defining piece in my professional career. And that particular situation informed every professional decision that I have made since then, including closing my private practice. That's something that I feel like more comfortable talking about because it was such a public thing. But yeah, so that initial experience happened in 2008. And then I was working as a therapist in multiple different settings, and actually experienced gun violence in quite a few of those settings. Working as a therapist in Las Vegas in 2017, when we had the 1 October experience, that was my last week working as a full-time therapist. My intention at that point in time was to open my private practice in October of 2017. I had everything in place to do so. That experience happened the last week that I was employed full-time in a residential treatment center. And that last week was spent processing a very similar trauma to something that I had experienced intimately with all of my clients. In that week, I felt like I was able to acknowledge how kind of experiencing gun violence on multiple occasions in a mass violence kind of setting, that was a catalyst for me learning how to give myself space to process what was coming up for me, while at the same time creating space for other people who have experienced similar trauma. It was an interesting balance. And then February 14th of 2018 was the Parkland shooting, which was on the 10-year anniversary of the shooting that I had experienced. That day, I was feeling very like, oh my gosh, it's been 10 years since this school shooting, Northern Illinois University. And like, I finally feel in a place in my recovery where I am feeling like I am able to move forward, where it's not on the forefront of my mind every anniversary. And then I heard news of the Parkland shooting and I was like feeling so defeated and so helpless. 10 years have passed and nothing has changed. Like, so many more people are having this experience. And I was just so burnt out. I don't have the capacity to continue creating space when I still have my own healing to do in this particular way. So that was actually the trigger, that the defining moment where I made the decision where I need to take a step back from clinical work. I need to close my private practice and do something completely different for a while so that I can figure out how to move forward in a way that feels best for me. And while I can still hold space for the people that are needing these services in the community, especially in a community where everybody at that point in time, only being 4 months out from the Vegas shooting, was in that same kind of recovery process.
When you made that big change, which was absolutely the right thing for you to do for yourself, like that was just you showing up for yourself in a way that nobody else really could. You know, you had to make that choice to take care of you. How did that feel for you identity wise? I've had some of those moments in my own life where I've made those big shifts, and it's like, this is, if I want to survive, you know, like this is what I need to do. But also, this is the thing I'm known for. This is the people tell me I'm a good person because I do this thing, you know, and I am going to not do this thing anymore. So what was that like?
Yeah, it was terrifying. One of the hardest decisions that I ever had to make. Being a therapist, I'm actually an art therapist, which means that I use visual art in my work with clients, because trauma is stored without words. It's stored as images. It's stored as body sensations, and the art provides a indirect access to those trauma memories and creates some space where we can talk about the artwork instead of talking specifically about the trauma. So art therapy was something that I knew I wanted to do since I was in high school, like young, was planning out this career. I knew I needed a master's degree to do it, was researching what are the prereqs I need to get into this grad school so that I could choose my major for undergrad, and like was just well on this path, very linear process. Finally got to open my private practice. And I was like, this is everything that I have been working for the past 10 years of my life. And I don't want it. I'm like, oh, okay. That was kind of like a gut punch.
Heck yeah.
I'm like, cool. I don't have a plan B. Now I need to start from scratch and figure that out. Meanwhile, having thousands of dollars in student debt, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, spending 10 plus years training to be in this career, everybody in my community being like, you are great at this. And literally like agencies in Las Vegas, having built relationships and built my reputation as a therapist in this community, and as someone who can genuinely hold space for someone else without trying to fix it or change it. People were asking, will you come be a therapist at this agency and this agency and this agency? And they're like, when you're ready, we're here. And even still today, 5 years later, people are still like, do you think you're ever going to go back into clinical work? Like, you're just taking this momentary blip to figure your stuff out. And once it's figured out, you're going to come back into this field. And like, and then it just feels like a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. I don't know that that's something that I feel like I want to go back into that field. And making the decision to step away was scary for so many reasons, because my entire identity was wrapped up in being that person. Also taking the financial, not that being a therapist, you make a lot of money, but you make more money being a therapist than you do as a kayak guide. And so taking it,
one of the great unfairnesses of the world, you know?
Making that choice to put myself in a potentially financially insecure position while I was still in debt was also scary. And my partner at the time was in medical school. So still racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt. Like, it felt like a very big risk. And I'm not a risk taker. that doesn't align with
I beg to differ.
Generally speaking, not a risk taker. I get really hesitant and want to know how things are, like, what's the outcome before I commit to something. And so that was a scary moment to just like jump off the cliff, metaphorically.
I feel like, so I've just, again, this might not be something that's shared, but sometimes it's like you don't know what the outcome is going to be of the jump, right? But you know what the outcome is going to be of the stay. And like, that's enough, you know, like there's, when it comes to that risk kind of aversion, if you will, you know, it's like, all right, well, there's this cliff here. I'm going to jump it. Like, the staying is something that I absolutely know what that's going to be. And that feels much worse than the...
Okay, all right. Yeah, it took me a minute to like register what you were saying with the stay. I'm like, what is the stay? But no, I definitely like, sticking around. Like,
yeah. You know it's going to happen there.
I've had, and it sounds like we've all had the experience of intuitively being pulled to make a decision and not knowing how the hell it's going to turn out. And that being very scary. But like, I got to do it. I got to do it. Like, and in those moments, at least in my experience, you know, nobody understands because I'm like literally still in the environment where I'm doing this current thing. So I can't really, like, I don't have community around this because like my spirit is calling me, but my environment doesn't necessarily reflect what my spirit needs yet. And that's why I'm making the change. You have to be a steward of your spirit to be able to make a shift like that. And I think, you know, taking it full circle before we get out of here, I think, you know, starting with Liz kind of pointing out that in her eyes, you've been a helper. And ultimately, we can only help as much as we help ourselves. And so intuitively, it would make sense that you would give yourself that life raft or a kayak to be able to discover what it's going to take for you to be able to show up for life on life's terms. Because you experienced a lot. And the people around, I couldn't. So the thing with me too, like, is And I hold a lot of spaces for a lot of people's stories now in what I do now. And I've always been like a people person, but I think coaching is about the closest I got to like really being, coaching and like sponsoring in my personal recovery modality. But like just being so close to people and their things without changing the outcome or without like contributing in such a way that you just do this, where like, but just holding space. And in order to be able to do that, like I have to be okay. I have to be okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't even believe in my ability to be able to show up and have that space for you. Then I think then if I'm doing something that I don't feel like I should be doing, but I'm showing up and creating space anyway, like then I'm gonna really have, because I'm bouncing around, but it's a space where there's a faith that I have to have that I'm creating a space that is beneficial for you. Like I have to be able to believe in myself to be able to create this space. And if I don't believe that I'm in the right profession, or if I don't believe I'm doing the right thing for me, like it's just like everybody's going down with the ship. So I might as well just jump off this cliff real quick. I don't know where I'm going to land, but even if I land in a kayak, I know this jump is going to be the right thing.
I loved all the metaphors. You brought them all together in that. That was just like, bam, bam, bam.
I had no idea where it was going or how we was going to get there, but we got there.
We got there. Yeah.
Just like the journey. And so, and to not even like trivialize it, because even getting there, where is there? I'm sure there's still a ton that you're figuring out. And I think you shared some things before we got on camera that there's things like in your current circumstance that you're trying to figure out, where do I fit? And so I think your story and this conversation in general has been like a testament to like the nonlinear process of figuring out where we belong and how we can contribute.
Absolutely.
And actually, I know we are getting close to wrapping up and definitely want to respect your time, Michelle, but if you are up for speaking to that a little bit, I do think there are folks that listen that are part of the Phoenix community, that are part of the recovery community, and maybe don't always hear their stories, whether that's in our podcast or just in recovery. We had Shane on recently and talked about gambling addiction as his, drug of choice is probably the wrong word to use, and how he doesn't hear a lot about that, within this community and elsewhere. So I think there's so many people who have that experience, and to hear people say it out loud is so powerful. So if you don't mind speaking to that a little bit, just like your experience with that.
Similar to every other part of my life, it's been a journey. My relationship with drugs and alcohol has been a unique one. I am not a person that's in recovery from a substance use disorder. As I mentioned, during my first year of college, there was this really significant moment where I was out of control. I literally had no control when there's a shooter on campus. It's a terrifying experience, right? And I knew at that point in time, like there are paths that I could take. I never leaned in to drugs and alcohol at that point in time because I didn't want to feel out of control. And so it was this control element that was like maintaining a sense of sobriety throughout my college years, because I didn't want to be in a place where I couldn't keep myself safe from anybody around me, from other people, or scenarios that I wouldn't know how to escape if I needed to be alive. If I needed to be alive. If I stay alive.
If that was at risk in that moment. Yeah, no, totally. I'm with you.
And instead, which is ironic, and also a piece that I think resonated with me with the Phoenix, I ended up joining a triathlon team. And I poured all of that internal, like, how do I keep myself safe? How do I move through these emotions into sport? And joining triathlon and cycling miles and miles and miles every day, the rhythmic movement of swimming and running was literally moving these emotions, completing my stress response cycle, moving them out of my body. When I joined the Phoenix, and even as an addictions counselor prior to coming into the Phoenix, I feel like I can relate a lot to folks who are in recovery from substance use disorders because trauma, to me, is the underlying thing that unites us all. I just chose something different when the opportunity presented itself in order to move through those emotions, to mask those emotions in a way. And so the underlying piece of pain and wanting to change how the discomfort that I'm feeling in my body in some capacity, that's the uniting factor for me. And I feel like the people that I work with can sense that, which is why I get asked all the time, how long have you been sober? What are you in recovery from? And when I joined the Phoenix, I was very intentional about not drinking or using. And I actually, the entire first year that I worked with the Phoenix, I did not drink or use, even though it's never been a problem. I took this year and stayed completely sober. And then I realized that, again, kind of recreating a cycle where I was giving my autonomy to somebody else, to my workplace, to other people to define what my recovery needs to look like for me. And that didn't feel good. And so for me, being able to take that autonomy back and trust myself in making decisions with my body, with my life, with my relationships that felt good to me was the healing piece. So being able to recognize and make informed choices in my life that may not look like somebody else's recovery journey, particularly folks in recovery from substance use disorders, was actually the healing element for me. After living in this bubble over here and then coming into this bubble where I was not using or drinking at all, and then finding this balance where like I can make choices that are the best for me and trusting myself to do that was the most healing piece.
There's just something so healing just being around someone who has that trust in themselves. Like that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Yeah.
It's just
I
what
feel
I
like
needed to hear today.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I feel like my entire recovery journey has been learning how to trust myself, trusting myself in taking up space, trusting myself in choosing the right path for me, even if it doesn't look like what I perceive other people want it to look like, trusting the people around me to still be there, regardless of what decision I make, and knowing that I can keep myself safe.
I love that. All right, I'm going to cry. So Bryce, you have to go.
That's unfair. How you know I'm not crying? I just cry differently.
I'm just trusting you to be able to talk it.
No, Michelle, we thank you for showing up and holding this conversation with us today. And I think there's somebody listening, a bunch of somebody's listening that have heard something that they need today. Before we get out of here, quick question. If you could go back in time to any previous iteration of Michelle and tell her any nugget of wisdom, what iteration would you choose and what would you tell her?
We like to start and end with the light questions, as you can see.
Exactly. I've listened to the podcast. I know this question was coming, and I'm like, still, I don't know. I don't know that there would be one iteration of Michelle that I'd go back to. I think it would be all of the Michelles that are standing on the edge of that cliff. And there's been so many moments in my life where I have been faced with just like, do I jump or do I not? And I think I would tell myself to lean in and trust that the universe has my back and that I can keep myself safe and that I know more than anybody else what I need to do to find what feels good for me and for my community and just trust that.
Wonderful, wonderful way to end the show.
My two favorite words that we've used several times are beautiful and trust. I feel like those are the bookends that make this one of my favorite episodes ever. So thanks.
So if Liz ever authors a book, we know what it's going to be called. It's going to be called Beautiful Trust.
Beautiful Trust. Yes. Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle, for being here, for being you, for taking up some space today, because we needed that from you, and the community needs it and you. And we're really grateful. And we are really grateful for everyone listening. Please do the same. Take up some space. Hold space for others when they need it. Maybe trust yourself a little bit more. Keep joining us week after week. Subscribe if you feel called to. Review us, rate us, and we will see you next time.
Catch you later.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you, or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.